Okay, we are gathered here together to listen to Suzanne.
We're having a moment.
While Suzanne pulls up her presentation and gets ready to go, do you know how to connect to the TV up there? Maybe, okay, we can get to that later. What's in front of you, obviously it won't be printed on 8.5 by 11 regular letter paper, but it'll be on nice paper. But finished newsletter. So there's the kind of up front note, then this will be the inside when people open up the whole thing on a big deal. That'll be much larger. Inside, there's the invite to the facilities advisory, or at least it talks about the facilities advisory process and invites them to the community webinar discussing the facilities advisory process. So the save the date note there is for that. You can see I will be emailing you a couple dates. First date for Eric and Lindsay if you want to rejoin the Facilities Advisory Committee final meeting. That's going to happen on the 18th. And I will email you that date. Evening of the 18th.
Next
Thursday. Not next Thursday. It is next Thursday.
Yeah, it is already.
It is next Thursday.
Wow.
And then the following Thursday is the community Zoom. So I'll get you those dates. Alexa and I will be working to make sure that in addition to this invitation in the newsletter, we'll be getting something on the website. We will be getting a school messenger and robocall out to families so that our families participate. But the hope is that this newsletter, that's 6 o'clock, yep. The hope is that this newsletter that will go to all mailboxes will gather people other than just parents.
Yes.
So get some patrons and people who are in the community. Probably the only other strategy other than just a newsletter like this, and maybe something for the future, would be when you start digging into more specific bond and levy plans. So come September, October, November, once the start of the school year is, it might be wise to have something that doesn't have a lot of general school information, and it might be wise to do either a one-page, very specific join us for this event, this Zoom, or even a postcard that has a cure date. Join us. We want you to hear about our plans for bond and for information about the levy. And so something very specific that's not kind of buried in a larger kind of just, I guess, barrage of text.
Did Megan do this one? Did she write this, put this one together? Or Alexa put this one together?
We did.
Okay.
But the team of ladies who's been helpful to us with our last 3 that kind of had this format, Kelly Fry, Fry Media, and then Lisa Matson, who's more the graphic design person. Those 2 ladies did help us. So we did all kind of the narrative copy, sent it to them. They did a lot of the layout, so they'll continue to be involved with us.
Megan's a contractor, right?
She is, and we decided, because this wasn't necessarily specific bond and levy related, we didn't throw this at her and didn't want to get charged more than we're already being charged for making services. But I think under the vein of getting good value there for the significant amount of money that you're spending there, obviously Alexa will make sure going forward that you really use her. She's not going to be able to attend the Facilities Advisory Committee meeting. She had talked about wanting to be there, but she's already got a trip with one of her children scheduled for next Thursday night, but she'll tune in to and see the community Zoom, and we'll be able to be a part of that message. Before I go any further, Suzanne is with us tonight, and she has some information, just some special education reporting. And so we've kind of got 2 parts here. There's going to be just some information that she's sharing with you tonight and providing in terms of just a kind of overview of special education programs and some numbers and some information that you need. And then the next kind of part 2 of it will be highlighting some kids and programs at our board meeting in the public and streaming and all that stuff going on, so that get a sense of how, other than just the numbers and some of the technical reporting we have to do, you get a general flavor for how some of the programs run.
So you're gonna have some of the kids come?
That's-
We're gonna try and have some of the kids come, otherwise they're gonna do an overview of the unified soccer team. So, it's been
Oh,
quite
I
enjoyable
heard
to
about
go watch.
Nice, yeah, I bet.
So,
Suzanne, thanks for being here.
no problem, I'm glad to be here. Okay, so there's gonna be some required components. I just wanna let you know, we have had a 12% growth in special education this year. And you can see a lot of the numbers are at the preschool. We're seeing the effects of COVID where kiddos haven't been out. Speech is the number one concern at the preschool level. That's why you're gonna see so many kids that are there. But just that 12% growth is where you're gonna see the numbers. So we're at 365 students as of May of this year right now. Okay. Any questions regarding? Okay. So that means we're gonna increase staffing. Right now, we had to add one half of a certificated FTE at the ECAP setting, so now we have a 1.0 staff member there for special education. DPE is staying the same. At Arcadia, the person was split between Arcadia and DPE, so we added another 0.5, so we have a 1.0 at Arcadia. We're having continued needs there. We might be a little bit overstaffed, however, we're having a lot of students that are having behavior concerns, so we need to make sure that we're having adequate staffing there.
Especially this time of year. Spring fever.
Yep. In middle school, we also are adding a 0.5 certificated special education teacher. We're having a huge growth in that 5th grade, moving up to 6th grade. So Tim's plan is to have that be a 6th grade teacher. And one of our other teachers is dually certified in special education and English, so they'll move to a 0.5 English position, so it'll be a 1.0 sped position that we're hiring, if you see the postings.
So it won't be a half a person, somebody, we gotta find something else for them to do.
So actually what we're doing is we're hiring people full-time, but it's only adding a half of an
Okay.
FTE because Danielle Troop right now is a 1.0 special ed teacher, but Tim's plan is to move her into English because we're having more sections of English.
Okay.
So, and then we'll hire
Half in there and
half English, yeah, we'll be hiring a 1.0 to cover part that she's doing over English and then
Perfect.
the other part. It's really hard to find a teacher that's willing to
Half
have
a
part-time.
person?
Right, yeah. And so we've added 1.5 hours of paraprofessional time at the high school to help support special education. And then overall, the district, we've hired a 1.0 psych because it is very difficult to find psychs. We're in the middle of interviewing for that right now. We're gonna start those. It closes Tuesday. And
We
we're
have a
gonna
lot of
start,
interest?
not a whole lot. I might have done some recruiting. Not
Hey,
from, not
we are
from
not
district,
shy about-
We're not losing.
Turnabout is fair play.
We're not
I'm
losing
not
anyone.
recruiting from, no, we're not losing anybody. I'm not
We're just
recruiting from
adding.
the south. That, so.
Those people in the South Plan?
So we do have a really good candidate that I'm excited about, but they'll also take some of the responsibility away from the counselors because the counselors, there was a new passage of a House bill, I think it was 5030 that we did the presentation last year, that they have to be spending 80% of their time with student contact. So doing the 504s is not student contact, it's more paperwork, so the psychs will take on that piece as well.
Can the parents do some of the paperwork, like pre-paperwork, and then the other folks sign off on it, or?
Well, it's being done while they're sitting in the meeting together. And so the parents you're sitting there and coming up with the modifications and accommodations together.
Sorry.
Okay. So the other piece is leavers data. Last year, I reported on this information. It doesn't look as good as last year because it's from 2021. That was when everything shut down due to COVID. So we're not gonna see as much engagement. Deer Park, if you look at it, you'll see, I wanted to show you historically where it was at. We were at 20% last year of no engagement, and now we're at 41%. We want that to be at 70% in order not to get dinged on the
70% no engagement, or?
no engagement. We want to have 70% engagement. Last year we had 80%, now we're down to 58%. So to me, it'll tell if we get like a level 2 next year for special education, it's going to be regarding this level 14 indicator that the state reports
Because we're a
on.
year behind.
Because we'll do an interview this fall for kids that left a year ago.
Oh, gotcha.
So it might be.
But are they
again
gonna take
next
into
year.
consideration that
I don't know if
was
we'll
a
get-
nightmare year?
everybody across the state will be at that.
Right, everyone's gonna look like, yuck, got it.
So hopefully it doesn't take us into an audit. I hope not, because every district in the
Everyone, yeah.
state
Yeah,
will
if
be
they
at
do
an audit level.
58%, I mean, that's not bad considering.
Well, and then you'll see on this next page, competitive employment. That's why I wanted to highlight this one. Deer Park had 50% competitive employment versus at the state level it was only 30%. So to me, that's a real strength for the,
That's when they go out, the sped kids graduate, we look at that.
they go ahead and competitive employment means that they're working 20 hours or more in a regular field. Otherwise, it could be other employment if they were doing less than that. Other education might be that they're getting like a certificate.
Oh, okay.
And then higher education obviously is college, so.
Cool.
But,
24 kids, is that
yep,
nice?
so one student can kind of ding you one way or another.
Well, yeah, but I mean, it's good to see that those kids are doing some things. It's good.
Especially during COVID.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah.
And so this is kind of showing that little graph, and you can see the dip from the 2021 year. So hopefully that'll swing back up. Okay, now this is a requirement, isolation and restraint data. This is one that we have to report to the state. This year you probably heard that there was legislation that was attempting to be passed, that we were doing away with isolation and restraint was not supposed to. They could still do restraint, which I felt personally was backwards, because if you look at the data even here, and I can pull it up for across the state, more people are getting hurt from the restraint than they are from the isolation. So you're talking about staff being hurt and students.
What does the restraint look like?
So everybody's trained in right response across the district. It's only when kids that are imminent harm to themselves or others. It could be somebody running out in front of the street and you're grabbing their arms, so that could be a restraint. It could be that the kids are trying to attack another student. They're trying to kick the teacher in the head. I've seen students not in this district go after staff and try and rip their face off. I mean, they're trying to, so you're restraining that would lead to isolation. You release them from the restraint as soon as you possibly can, and then isolation as well. You want to make sure that they're not in there for
So this restraint is hands-on, no external straps or nothing like that
No.
is permitted yet?
Yep.
Gotcha.
no zip ties, no handcuffs, nothing like that.
And I think the larger point when we pushed back a little bit on the legislation was that there are, some of the legislation, I think, what we came to find is really based on some anomalies out there. So I think there probably are examples like you could find in any field of malpractice, of people who aren't following kind of best practice, professional behavior. So whether it's, whether it's some of the special education advocacy groups that end up getting involved in situations where there's been significant abuse of current regulation, maybe where there's been systemically some issues. So a lot of that I think was stemming, the presence of the bill didn't reflect widespread malpractice. I think it reflected the reality that there are still some systems that have work to do. So I think that's why we felt comfortable really in pushing back on this, is that we've got a lot of people that are well trained, but also in are very difficult situations. So the idea that we go from having the ability in very specific situations to be involved hands-on restraint or isolation versus where the law was going, where basically never didn't make a lot of sense.
How many kids, we do have choice kids that come in our district that are special ed, choiced in?
Actually, we are at capacity for special education students, so they typically are being denied and they need to go back to their home district because we are so full.
Okay, that was,
So a part of this too is you look at, we had 10 students, led to 31 incidents, so it's the same, typically the same students that are having restraint or isolation. This also goes back to why we have more staffing. We've had a lot of students that have moved into the area. We have another group home that's moved into the area, and so they typically are having students with more difficulties. So, and I can't see that declining. The other thing I would look at too is we have had to access Excelsior, which is an outside mental health school to help support us. Excelsior is closing at the end of this year. And so it's leaving a gaping hole in the resources that are available within the community. And
That's the one in Spokane, correct?
And there's nothing else like it.
so I have reached out to OSPI as of Friday and said we need some help because there's talking about a state needs project. So the School of the Blind and the School of the Deaf are state needs projects. And so they really focus some time and attention on that. I think that the behavioral support is going to be a really needed area. Coming from Minnesota, we have a lot of levels and systems that were available that you could send students to. And I've been here 10 years and then since Excelsior's leaving, it's going to be really hard. So
Does that mean the kids we have at Excelsior are coming back?
we have one that was transitioning back already, but I was waiting to do an intake for the other student when Travis got the notification that they were closing down, and so now we're trying to scramble and figure out what we're gonna do.
One of the ways, the reality of kind of actually confluence, not that, well, in the end, one of our newer group home kids who was having a difficult time in that transition, basically the introduction to the building, ended up deciding that she didn't want to be in the building anymore. She's 11. And so when that student leaves the building, literally walks out of the building, rather than restraining that young person when, rather than just grabbing him and holding back and causing some type of physical power struggle, would be an example of why if someone called you as a board member and said, why were there 3 staff members following someone down the street in the middle of Deer Park in the middle of the day with another car following and here comes the sheriff's car. It's a good example of why, these types of rules that exist for a good reason end up in those types of situations where, again, there's the outcome of a physical power struggle of you're staying here at school, no, I don't want to be at school, is clearly not where we want to be. But at the same time, you end up with the flip side of that where they probably would have only intervened, let's say this particular student was running out in the middle of traffic or causing some form of lack of safety for the rest of the community, then of course someone's going to get involved. But until then, it's a matter of just ensuring we've got eyes on students generally safe, and wait until that student's ready to come back.
Oof.
Yeah.
The police always can't do anything either.
So what do you, I guess this is the ignorant part of me, but what do? I mean, you just follow them until somebody comes and gets them, or
Yes.
do you call the group home and say,
Yes.
come get your kid?
Or foster care
Wherever.
husband, and say we need you
Are
to.
they usually pretty responsive?
It
Not always.
depends, and it depends on
I can't answer that at a meeting.
depends on where
Yeah.
located.
I think the reality for those folks as well is they've got multiple kids, some at the group home while some kids are here, so not all of them are necessarily in school on any given day. So trying to navigate personnel and difficult on both sides.
If that's a continual issue, like day in and day out, what are the repercussions of that, if any, or is there anything we can do about that?
So typically, if they hurt staff, we will suspend for a day in order to regroup and figure out what we're going to do with the plan.
What if they just keep leaving?
We keep calling and then we try and come up with a new plan.
It's so sad.
And come up with another plan and then another plan and then another plan.
Right.
So,
Until they're 18.
So we have 3 group homes in the district now?
2, 3?
2. We have 2 currently, but there's also foster care placements as well. So.
Yeah.
And one of the group homes is, so we were told that, so the behavioral students are coming here and the district to our south is going to handle more of the students that are accessing DDA, like that they're more likely to be nonverbal and have higher behaviors. We just have the kids that are potentially offending and have gone through the juvenile court system.
Well, I commend your work. That's very important work.
Thank you. It's always interesting.
Challenging.
It's never boring.
Challenging.
No,
It's never boring. That's why I get to come down and pick on Travis once in a while. He's gracious enough to accept that.
Few more weeks.
Oh, I know where you're working.
Right?
Fair enough.
Follow you.
Fair enough. Any other questions for Suzanne? Okay.
Thank
We're free
you.
to hang out for a little bit.
I'm gonna eat my pizza for sure.
Yep.
I just want everybody to know that she cheated, she ran yesterday, and
She cheated.
I heard you beat her.
by 2 minutes.
He did beat me by 2
Well,
minutes.
she would have beat you if she not stopped so many times.
That's what I said, she must have cheated.
I did run the last 100 feet. I wanted the good picture,
Absolutely,
but I was trying to shove my daughter out of the
Walk
way.
across the thing, holding each other's hands up.
Oh.
Just so you could say you won, trying to shove her out of the way.
She beat me by 2/100ths of a second.
But who's counting?
Not our family.
100s.
My daughter did that last
0.02.
year. We walked the whole way, and like 50 feet from the thing, she takes me and pushes me back, and just takes off running, stands under the thing. I won, gay old brat.
That's funny. Thank you for all you do.
Yeah,
Long distance.
yes, thank you for,
Appreciate you and all your crazy.
and all your staff.
They're amazing. They're amazing.
Yes.
They're doing some really hard work,
Yes.
but I'm lucky to be here.
That does a
Thank you,
job
Travis, for hiring
special
me.
people.
And then leaving.
I love you.
Not that we're no mean or anything, but
We try not to.
Yeah, I'm not sure these two should get in the same stuff together.
Honoring myself.
guilt tripping.
Two of them.
Just an item to kind of ponder and consider. I don't necessarily want to spend a bunch of time because it's really, it's very much just an idea and was a conversation, and that was the prospect of Deer Park School District owning the city's ball fields. So, just an interesting topic that I'm not sure what the city will choose to do, but I think the first that we had heard of this was kind of more just general rumor, and then it was at least at some level with city officials was discussed as well. Would you guys be interested, and what would that look like? So not sure exactly what level of conversations or depth of level of conversations would happen there, but I just think that you all should be prepared to kind of think through that and talk through that, understanding that, and I guess one of the conversations that potentially Alexa will have to have with Tim Virgil going forward, Tim will have to have with the city council, you all at some point in some way, shape, or form end up having with the city is, and I think particularly for those of you who have had kids who have used that facility, hi Nicole,
Hey.
who have had kids or been part of some type of softball league or anything in that facility, I just think that it's not your job, my job, Alexa's job to do the city's thinking for them. As much as that from a maintenance perspective might be a bit of a drain on city resources, I wonder, I just wonder, knowing that now Parents Field isn't what it was because 3/4 of Parents Field is taken up by a beautiful new fire station, community center, and that's great. But if the only other city-owned kind of park / athletic ball field space are the city fields, even if the city's interested in I'll say ridding themselves of that, and even if schools were interested, I would think you all would want to be really thoughtful about the reality of the fact that the people who have used those fields and worked with the city to get access to those fields aren't just going to go away. In
There's no place for them
Yeah,
to
there's
go.
nowhere else. Miss Burke doesn't have these
So that's my
stuff, you know,
point. That's exactly where I'm going. Is you're just to the extent that this becomes an ongoing discussion, and would just encourage you, as we talked briefly about that today with Steve, and just in the larger land acquisition that we're working through the city with. Give you an update on that in a moment, but yeah, I just think regardless of what they want to do, I think you're going to want to be really careful about what you do. Now, long term, is that 20 acres if you know, if
Is
there's
it 20?
development, I think so. I think there's 2 separate lots there that are
Okay.
each 10 acres. Not all of it's the ball fields, so a lot of it's
Yeah,
parking lot.
mine,
Yeah. Yeah, I feel like you're gonna wanna think really carefully about the fact that there's gonna be some significant upgrade costs. So, you know, buying it as is doesn't necessarily get you to where you want or need to be. And you still have Weber, the road, to deal with in terms of kids getting there.
Would we
You're
have
talking
to
about
provide overpass or underpass?
I don't think you have to, no. You could, I mean, you probably would want to if, you know, does there need to be? I mean, there never has been a crosswalk there. You know, does it change anything if the district owns it? I don't think so. I guess if you were, in addition to what happens after school, if you started using it for school day, PE and such, you know, maybe you have to think about doing something on Weber that allows for something rather than just running across a city road.
Stoplight.
Well, a blinky, like person
Yeah,
walking right.
crosswalk of sorts.
So-
But there's nowhere else to do baseball in Deer Park, correct?
No.
Baseball or softball, correct?
Yeah, there's,
Other than the,
Yeah,
yeah.
correct.
It's
Other
busy
than
on
district owned
weekends.
fields.
Oh, yeah.
It's so busy.
So I think that I'm not simply saying that just, you know, it's not worth conversation, but I just think that I would just encourage you to be really thoughtful about how you proceed and as you work with the city and talk with them. Maybe as Alexa and Steve work with the larger facilities plan and with the city, maybe there's some advantage of going there. There's certainly, they're plenty further developed than is the acreage in the forest behind Deer Park High School. But there still are significant costs. So let's just throw out round numbers. If there's $1.5 million invested in a varsity softball field, one field, which is not far off from where the estimates are. So based on the estimates in today's dollars we have for those things, you know, if there's $1.5 million involved in brand new fields, or a little bit more than that, if there's something even remotely close to that, $1 million or $750,000 invested in getting the city fields to where they need to be, is that knowing that then you're also going to have land acquisition costs in addition to that? All of a sudden,
one thing I worry about is if we put $1.5 million into a softball field. I've played on every softball field in Spokane, varsity field, coaching girls. They're locked up. Nobody else gets to use them. And that's the thing, if we bought those, we take the I mean, just being a fiduciarily responsible board, we should look at that, and we would almost have to keep kids off that field because they get trashed. And softball fields are different because
which I think you realize you wouldn't want
No,
to do.
we wouldn't
So
want to.
right,
Yeah, you
which
could
then
do
you'd
that
end up
on
with a black eye,
compromise.
and so that's exactly my point,
So then we
right?
got
Is if
extra
all of a sudden
field.
there aren't fields,
Yeah.
and then you're saying, oh, you can't have access to the fields because they're not treated well. Well, you know, well, we have access to all your other fields. What about what's the deal with these? And so it's going to create an interesting issue, given that the city doesn't have other fields to go to, and then all of a sudden, if all of the ball fields, for whatever purpose, soccer or baseball or softball, otherwise are all district-owned fields, then you're almost, and they are public resources at some level. But to your point, yeah, we want to take really good care of those public resources and use them in certain ways. So anyway, I think you've got certainly Steve, who knows the ins and outs of all of these things and is working with the city. Alexa's getting up to speed, but just really want to make sure that as this proceeds, and the thing that we did decide today that I think it's important for you to hear is that any discussion of softball in the city's fields and wherever that may go, whether that's actually an actual offer or not, I do think it's important to understand that would be considered completely separately from the 42 acres you're looking at presently, and that we're already
Yes,
down the road.
absolutely.
Yes. So not trying to wrap that
That would
mess
back
into this
everything.
and correct.
We can't do that.
Exactly. And then Steve has made some really good progress working with Christine Wilson and Gabby Gurian at Perkins Coie, so our kind of real estate attorney side, working with them. Those attorneys representing us have been working with Chuck Zimmerman at the city. I think we're making really good progress there. So there's some legal back and forth going on. I think where the last piece is kind of sitting, and where what Steve has been helping is with the reality of not finalizing a real estate transaction and then not being able to pass a bond and having to unwind that transaction. So to Steve's point today, having to unwind the money that's exchanged hands, titles, all the things that go with that, all the paperwork that goes with, whether all of us have bought a house and been involved in that stuff, and there's lots of paperwork, and having to do that, have money across the table, go bank to bank, and then unwind all that at some point if that doesn't work out, because there is a date in that contract that says if we're not ready to do the development on the infrastructure road side, then the city can say, hey, we want it back, we're done. Now, there could also be an opportunity at that date in 2027 for the board and for your superintendent to approach the city and say, okay, we want to renegotiate. We haven't been able to pass a bond yet, but we're still working really hard. We think we're going to get there, and this date's coming, and so can you give us another year? So there's always the opportunity to do that. But in the meantime, point is that Steve's been working with our attorneys to work with the city's attorney that maybe we don't actually finalize that transaction. So maybe there's something that happens where it's absolutely the district's land to use and develop for school purposes, but before you complete a transaction, only potentially to have to unwind it, which would be the worst of all possible outcomes given what we've talked about. At least you avoid kind of a mess in the middle there. So anyway, all of that's kind of being worked out at the legal level, and I would imagine by your meeting at the end of May, certainly by June, I think we'll be real close to having something ready to sign. So
Nice.
working hard there.
This is a 3-year process. That's good.
Yeah. And I think the only other thing real positive outcome of the drawn out nature of it has been that in the meantime, where we began with 9 acres has turned into 42, and it's all part of the same land acquisition process, which is positive.
And I guess when I said, I'm not sure we want to do that with the city fields, I don't think we should look away from that at the same time, because if they come to us and it's still something we can do, and it gets us through until we can do something else, that might be, we should still evaluate it.
Yeah.
So you said that's 20 acres, the city field? Couldn't we do a varsity field and 2 just school?
Trash fields.
Yeah, just Little League,
Isn't there enough room? Yeah, to at least do
Well,
2
I think
fields.
that if that's a 20 acres, it must go a long ways to the back. Because
That's what I
there's only like
Could there
5
not be
acres.
2?
I can
Two
easily,
fields
before
up
we're done
front?
tonight, I can pull it on Scout and we can check. So
Is it too
Um,
small to do 2 fields across that whole front area?
There are 2
You're talking about
fields
the
across
sports
the
complex or
house.
the
Yeah,
ones?
'cause you
where
could
have
do
cleared the
2
trees?
in the
it
back.
has to.
It
They're
does?
already
Yeah, the
there.
sports complex
Oh.
has 2.
Oh.
Yeah, but past the parking lot,
Well,
I assume
and then
is
you're gonna-
the rest of the acreage.
There's a lot of
I'm
things
looking
like
at. And we could put
parents
2 right there.
built the dugouts on those fields and maintain them and did all the stuff. So there's a lot of ownership in those
That's
things.
not the right Scout. Scout.
Well, we could leave those 2
So
fields and build
one of the
varsity
things
behind.
that Alexa, I think we're in a place where I can guarantee you that any of this discussion, when we do a community level Zoom in a couple of weeks talking about facilities projects, this will not be a part of that. This is all, again, this is for this room and very speculative at some point, but I think it's just important that you have some idea of what's some of the conversation going on. Obviously, what you are aware of is the kind of the master plan that we had talked about that's there. So in showing you this, there's obviously plenty of land there to work with when it comes to softball fields, baseball fields, soccer fields, practice football field, all that stuff. So to the extent that this, and we went as far as, so I have, over the last few years, most of you have probably seen the plan that was, it's labeled Conceptual Plan 2. But under here, there are 3 other alternate plans for ways fields could be laid out. And in addition to that, we, at the time, had paid to have all of the surveying done, so all of the topography of that entire portion is done and been surveyed. So there's been a lot of kind of upfront costs that have been sunk into getting it, some plans ready to go. So you're just going to have to, as you move forward, make some decisions. And then finally, the last part we did with this, so this is back in 2016. And then those numbers that were in bid documents, so each of those were in different phases. So phase one, which was a varsity softball field, costs of which are outlined and itemized here. So all of that's here for you to take a look at. And then what we had to do in addition, just based on, again, preliminary and very speculative talks with the city, was just a general and probable cost estimate of renovating city fields to bring them up to a nice spec. So those two pieces of information are there for you. Connected to all of this, just wanted you also to be aware that the email that you received from Jill Ellingson talking about softball and fields and some of those things, Alexa and I had an opportunity to meet with Jill as well as her father, Dwayne Watts. Came and they met with us in here on Friday. We spent an hour, maybe 90 minutes with them, went through all of this with them. I thought, I know Jill expressed some fairly significant concerns to you via email. I felt like we pretty much alleviated most of that with, she needed to see that there'd been some planning, some thinking, and that all of those elements related to equity and Title IX and girls softball and all those things were being addressed and looked at by the board. So so we left there. I think that you've got two people that seem to be enthusiastic and willing to be involved in the go forward with facilities planning and getting a bond passed. So they certainly see the need.
Good.
So it's
That's
good.
great.
I'm gonna grab the last one.
Wow, that's not cheap.
Yeah, I don't know.
No, we're about the same. That's crazy.
Yeah.
The cost went up significantly.
Oh, well.
Both those.
Yep. Oh, yeah.
Sorry.
Just an FYI item, quickly going on behind the scenes. Typically what you do in late May or early June, and it's typically been late May, but I think by contract we moved it to early June because we didn't have access to some of the calendars from the school, but we'll be bringing a school calendar for the 2025-26 school year, so we're always basically a year out.
Is there any reason why we can't do like 3 years out and just put them out there?
I guess probably more just trying to ensure that I think when you get 3 years out, there's potential that you've made change to conferences.
I was just curious. Somebody asked me that the other day, and I was like,
Your contracts
Things
might
can change your
change
year.
in that period of time.
Okay.
So I think being out that extra year, so having 2 years calendars published at the end of every school year probably is the right place to be.
okay, thank you.
And there are some things that are delineated in the collective bargaining agreement for us currently around specific dates.
Yep.
But it also specifies that we will align with neighboring districts, so we want to make sure that we're aligned at the same time.
An FYI item for you that kind of two items actually related to collective bargaining agreements here in the district. One is a change, so Senate Bill 5175 was a bill that it had a number of different elements to it. There were actually two bills that were floated related specifically to principal contracts and principal employment. One of those was targeted at giving principals the ability to bargain working conditions. So ultimately, I think just the nature of what so many principals experienced during COVID and some of the difficulty of that job in general and just the craziness of it and the amount of time and hours that principals invest. I think there was some concern that without the ability to, in the form of a bargaining agreement, really agree or at least decide upon what the principal's job duties actually are other than run the school and do everything. So the real downside, other than acknowledging that principals work incredibly hard and long hours of fantastic work, is trying to define that work. And does that mean that then they only have to be at this many after-school events? Does that mean that they only have to attend this many IEP meetings? Does that mean that if the school reaches this threshold of students, we have to hire another person? Does it mean, so I could, that list goes on and on and on and on. And ultimately, I think the downside of that is it would I think unfortunately, a relationship between your district office administrators, your superintendent, and your principals will end up probably being sacrificed in the back and forth of arguing that. And so that bill fell by the wayside. The one that did not, that passed, actually, and I'll use the word really carefully, allows, does not require, allows a district to extend contract durations for principals to 3 years. We all know that the minute any one district does it, everybody's going to want to do it. So we've all been here where, okay, well, they paid this or they gave us that and that they do this here. So so I think it'll be important regionally and we've got a couple meetings coming up regionally, superintendents and otherwise, to kind of get a sense of what folks are thinking here, where they're going to go. At some point, I guess I'll just, the cynic in me says someone's going to cave, and you're going to end up with principals on 3-year contracts. I don't know exactly, honestly, at this point, other than it means what it says it means, 3-year contracts. But for example, the example in a lot of superintendent contracts is I've got a 3-year contract. In language that you don't have here in Deer Park is, let's say, you have termination for cause. So if your superintendent does something in the category of malpractice, unprofessional conduct, whatever that might be, if you can terminate for cause, and typically that doesn't have financial penalty. But if you want to terminate without cause, then typically there's either if there's not language in a contract, then you're going to get, if you're saying you just need to be done, we don't like. You're too tall. I like the color of your hair. Whatever it might be, you don't like it, and you say, so we're done, and you sign it to your contract. That means that, and you say, but we don't want to pay you, then you're going to get sued, and that's going to be decided in court. There's been a ton of buyouts in recent years for various reasons, some COVID related, some politics related, and otherwise. But things have gotten very expensive. So a lot of contracts have gone to the place of termination without cause. Then you define, okay, if you're terminated without cause, what does that mean? My whole point in saying all of that is that even though that contract's a 3-year contract, if you're terminated without cause, is that if the board has the ability to terminate without cause, is it really a 3-year contract?
So we would have to, chairman would have to sign those every 3 years instead of every year, right? Or don't, because I sign all the teacher contracts, I don't remember signing principal contracts.
Yeah, I don't know.
I never understood that, so.
It's a working agreement, but we pass through salaries for you.
Yeah.
But they still have contracts, so in terms of why you signed some or not others, yeah, we'd have to dig into that.
So the principal contracts were formerly 1 year and correct
Year-to-year contracts. So the stipulations on those 3-year contracts are the fact that the contract of a duration of more than 1 year can only be offered if the principal has been employed for 3 or more consecutive years in a school district, has been recommended by the superintendent as a candidate for a 2 or 3-year contract, because they've proven the ability to, quote unquote, stabilize instructional practices, and they must have also received a comprehensive performance rating of level 3 or above. 4 is the top. And then they have to have met the school district's requirements for satisfying an updated record check. That's why that's a key part of a 3-year contract. I don't know. It seems like it would be just a general part of employment. But anyway,
Hopefully.
so just it's an interesting conversation. Like I said, we'll report back to you on it. It's just one of those bills that I think everyone's trying to figure out, what does this really mean, and what does it mean if a principal has a 3-year contract, and then obviously at the end of the day, I think that for you, that means if you end up going there and your contract or any contract for any district reflects that, it means that then if at some point you don't want to be done with that principal, you either got to wait 2 years for that contract to expire, and basically in year 2 you're informing that principal that, sorry, that year 3 is not going to be added on. So rather than adding a year and kind of having a rotating or revolving 3-year contract, you're basically putting someone on notice that this isn't going well.
But does it say it has to be 3? Could it be 2?
Could be 2, yeah. So anyway, something for discussion at a later date, and something that I think by the time that later date comes, I'll probably be talking about it in meet. I'll also be talking about it with you, but something that given our close proximity and ongoing discussion, we'll probably be in close contact as to exactly what's going on. And we have a plan next week to talk among superintendents about how are we interpreting this. And then lastly, next week, in addition to us meeting, we're also meeting because Stevens Clay, who does a ton of Paul Clay, does a ton of the legal representation in the area, is kind of going to break down the legal elements of this law. So we'll get some legal advice.
Do principal contracts ever include conditions, like your performance review must require this, or the school's performance must require this? Is that ever involved?
They have a working agreement, so it's a working agreement that is, kind of lays out that.
But never performance, never like school performance.
Like tied
No
to
contract.
test
Hmm?
scores? Like tied to test scores, you mean?
Tied to test scores or, student performance, things like that.
Principals have, they're a part of what's called TPET, Teacher Principal Evaluation Project. And so teachers and principals have an evaluation tool that we use, so they're evaluated using the Association of Washington School Principals Framework, AWSP.
Okay.
So tied into that is instructional leadership, climate and culture, safety, family and communication. I think there are 6 or 7 tenets, right, or criteria
Yeah.
for the principals who are on comprehensive, much like teachers, but 8 criteria.
So I think to that point, you could make the argument that while it's not in their contract, it's just part of the law.
Yes.
Performance is tied
Gotcha.
to their evaluation, but it's not part of their contract.
Do you know who pushed that? Or why they pushed that?
Lisa Wellman, I think, was the prime bill sponsor. And I think that Lisa Wellman worked in conjunction with the AWSP, as she just mentioned, the Association of Washington School Principals. And I think that they just felt like, given the increasing politicization of things, the fact that things I say or things I do might be construed in such a way, and I don't have job security. So how am I able to make difficult decisions and take important things on in a time when things are really dicey? How can I do that knowing that if I make a mistake or I choose not to take that thing I should be taking on, if I do take it on, I could lose my job. I have no protection. So I think that's kind of the underlying theme there, is just the fact that it's more and more difficult in today's society to do that job and to do it in a way that you're bold and courageous and without feeling like you're putting your job at jeopardy.
Okay.
I'd be curious if my answer actually reflects. I mean, I think that's part of the underlying theme. I'd be curious about the building principal's perspective on that. So that's just my 2 cents.
Okay.
Either two of you see it any differently?
No, I would agree. You're spot on.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm just trying to think. I can't think of any situations where a principal would not be given just cause,
Yeah. Oh,
right?
you're too
Unless there
short.
was something egregious
Too
or
tall.
unlawful, but that usually you go through the process of a plan of improvement and you work with that principal to allow them to grow and learn, and either there's change or there's not, and then you make the decision from there,
It's like everybody else.
just like everybody else. Yeah.
The other item that if we have a little bit of time tonight, we can do, otherwise maybe at our upcoming board meeting we can do, but on the 31st, is that the date that we ended up with? Or the 30th? Anyway, bargaining,
Yep, we've got it scheduled for the 31st.
31st. So we could wait till the meeting in May, depending on how late we go tonight. Otherwise, we have the ability to do a closed meeting for the purpose of bargaining strategy. So we've got bargaining coming up with teachers, and we have a 3-year contract, but we did our one opener this year is salary. So the full contract is not open, but we will end up coming to the table to talk just about that one topic. So so we'll have the ability to have some dialogue about that, but we need to make sure that we have an opportunity. Well, we do have the ability to talk about that at a time without
Do we have to announce that? Do we have to say we're gonna do that? No?
Nope.
Let's do it at the end of the night.
Okay.
If we can, just because,
I agree.
Okay, perfect.
if that's okay.
That's just fine. Okay, I think one of the last items that we've got is returning to the dialogue Joe and Cameron presented to you at the last meeting about the alternative school, WIAA. Potentially you've had a chance to think about that, talk about it. If not, we can just think about it, talk about it tonight, but just quick refresher. In order for us to work at that threshold, being a fairly large, or one of the largest 1A schools, if we don't subtract that population of kids from our total, and the WIA makes mandates that we have a school code, without it, there's a good chance that we're absolutely going to be in the AA, 2A world. If we do it, even though there's still a small chance that we would be 2A, it gives us a much better chance to stay in the 1A classification. They talked to you about all the justification of that at the last meeting. Based on that, any further questions, any dialogue?
Right.
I hope
That's the way to do it, yeah.
I mean, that's a lot of far places to go for those kids, and it's the yucky time of year, you know, when it's the snow and the who knows what, and midnight coming back on a school night like that. I hope we don't have to do that.
Okay.
I would love to stay 1A.
Yep. And I think if we can come up with some sort of a name,
And that's
or
the key. Yep.
that we can deal with that. That's something. I mean, we call it Deer Park Square, I don't care. Pick your name or whatever, but we can come up with something. Because those kids earn it just as much as everybody else. But
So here's what Alexa and I will do over the next couple of weeks prior to our meeting on the 22nd, I think. We'll re-engage. Is it the 22nd? We will re-engage with Joe and Darren Snyder and kind of the alt school group, see if there's any strong opinions as to, they'd love to go in this direction. I think Joe mentioned having talked to a few who really felt like they wanted the name near Deer Park in that school name.
absolutely.
So we can proceed with that. Maybe if there's strong feelings about a particular name, we can bring that to you on the 22nd. If they have some choices that they want to throw before you, we can go there. But ultimately, I think the one piece before I go to the OSPI website and begin the process of requesting that school code, I'm going to have a name to associate with the code. So basically, we've got 2 weeks. And we're on notice, given your desire to move forward, to come up with a name for that program. The other part that was discussed, I think it's important to make sure we're on the record understanding, is that even though these students will have, they'll be getting a blue diploma cover at the graduation ceremony, they will be inside will be a different diploma or a different name on the diploma. They will still be part of the Deer Park High School graduation.
Absolutely.
So that was the other part that was discussed, that was important, and I think that certainly, given the nature of they're on the same campus, they're part of this community, and so having them say they don't need to have a separate graduation ceremony.
Yeah, I think that's awesome.
Okay. Any other discussion or questions about that before we move forward with it?
No, I think what Cameron and Joe said last time made 100% sense. So,
Okay.
we don't want that. They shouldn't feel any different. To us, it's a number and a name,
Yep.
right? It's not. They're still our kids, and they're still.
And so the part as a board is you have to realize one of the ramifications of that, or at least one of the things that's going to happen, is then you're going to end up with, when someone goes to the OSPI report card and they pull up the list of schools in Deer Park, that this school, the alt school presently, is going to come up as its own school. And when you compare the performance based on some of how those students have performed historically, it's going to look very different. And so we'll have to deal with the reality of the fact that as those kids, they have ended up in that setting because for whatever set of reasons, they've struggled. And so one of the reasons why you have that program is to help those kids through those struggles. But many of those struggles being some rooted in the sliver of academics, but a lot of life has not allowed them to potentially engage in academics the way that they maybe would have wanted to or certainly need to. And so just knowing that then you're going to have a program, a high school here that's going to be in that category of and I don't know exactly what it's going to look like right now, but they will struggle from a testing perspective. There's all kinds of ways that they can access pathways. One of the things that I'm going to encourage Joe and Cam and Troy to look at is when kids at our traditional Deer Park High School, when they struggle, they have a lot of pathways open to them because they have access to programs inside the high school. For example, kids at Deer Park High School, if they don't pass the Smarter Balance test, if they haven't taken the SAT or ACT and achieved a score, they haven't done, say, the ASVAB or things, they then have the ability to choose a CTE pathway where they combine CTE coursework. Kids in our alt school won't have access to those that CTE pathway, so because they don't have access to CTE courses at the high school because they're enrolled in this other school. So kids who are in our alt school don't go inside the building, and they don't have access to those programs.
Oh.
So there are just elements of the unique challenge that is when you separate a building like that, and HomeLink's no different. So as kids work through this program, they don't have access to CTE frameworks and pathway courses. Some of them are enrolled at New Tech, so they might get CTE credits there, but we don't offer CTE courses as part of HomeLink.
So the kids from here can come and take PE and
Here being where?
Kids from here, sorry.
Yeah, HomeLink, yeah.
They can take 2 classes and still be part of HomeLink in a normal school, right? Or has that changed?
We have very, very few kids doing the dual enrollment thing.
But
is
that's
split FTE.
yes, but it's doable, right?
It is doable.
Is there any reason why, if one of those kids at the alt school wanted to take a class at Kevin Kernan's class or whatever, that they couldn't?
Technically and legally, no. But what Joe and previously Bob and Troy and what they would tell you is that a la carte method that I want to get the best of this, I want to do some of that,
Yeah,
can
it's not a
create
good
problems.
thing. Yeah.
And so the minute you crack that door for this situation, where do you draw that line? Is it you can only take 1? Can you take 3? Is it only if you need it for graduation? So there's just a lot to it.
Okay.
Presently, the arrangement is when
go to
things
one
haven't
school
worked
and-
out for you here at Deer Park High School,
Gotcha.
you can attend school at the alternative school, or you can go to contract ed. But this option doesn't work anymore.
Okay.
That's your option.
Gotcha.
And so to the extent that you would, you'd like to explore changing that, to the extent that becomes a problem that makes its way to your level, then I would encourage you to engage with Joe and Troy and make sure that you have that conversation with them.
Well, that's why we pay you guys to make those decisions.
Okay, she can talk with Joe and Troy. Yeah, no, it's come up a lot, and the answer has traditionally always been no.
No, I think and
Here or
there's some
there.
really good reasons for that. So
For getting a new school code, that we don't have to have a new administration though, right? We don't have to get a principal or a vice principal.
Yeah, we don't. That was actually something that came up in the kind of the original, when we got denied last year. That was one of the things they said was one of the problems. But when I clarified, they said technically, no, you're not going to have a completely separate administration to run that school. If it's on campus, you can still have it. And there's, I think probably because there's other examples of that happening in other districts.
Right.
well, don't we pay Darren to do that, basically to run that school? Or?
No, not from an administrative perspective. I mean, he's a teacher.
Okay.
He's a teacher in the program, and he's got multiple certifications. He does the ALE plans,
Yep.
but he's not an administrator.
Okay, gotcha. Cool. Thank you for making that very confusing.
Anytime. Just
For the
wanted to
next
make
2
sure you're
months,
fully
right?
informed.
For the next 2 months, anytime.
I think one of the last things tonight might be, and this is just something to kind of begin ushering in the transition that you're going to want to be thinking about with Alexa, and that is, this is something we've typically done in June and then revisited in July. But put it up on the screen.
So, I have a question about Alexa. So, seeing you're here.
You want the Amazon?
No.
Okay.
No, but I don't have one of those at home. I don't need any more people telling me that. But, so we have negotiated a contract and everything. Is there any reason why we can't sign that contract and make it official and before?
No reason. I've formally resigned, so. you
So
sign
can we
it.
put that on our next?
Wondering strategically if we want to talk about bargaining and finishing that first.
I don't think so. That's up to you guys, but if not, can we put it on the next, can we put it on one of the next two
Sure.
agendas, please?
Did we add on the contract that she has to buy us pizza and salad for?
No, it's an understatement, it's not written. But it's
It's one of those reasons for just cause you don't.
We do.
Yeah, this is your warning.
Pizza, just go.
Your board goals, number one is pretty much no longer a board goal only because that the decisions have been made there. So you're no longer getting informed of or participating in making decisions about how we spend our federal money. Essentially, that money is now generally spent, or at least it's committed in areas. You'll have it through next year, and then that money will be gone. So you have positions and facilities improvements, ways that you've spent federal money that we have to report, and both to OSPI and to the federal government. But essentially leveraging that federal money in ways that, as you said here in the goal, as we talked about, that addresses learning loss, that addresses other needs that the money was designed to address. That's going to be a goal that's going to disappear off this list. So to the extent that you have other priorities, other things that you want to focus on, great. The second one is acceptance of the Facilities Advisory Committee's plan, working with them to build and implement a successful bond plan. Obviously, we're still in the midst of that. We have that final meeting coming up next week. We have the community Zoom coming up 2 weeks from now. So that one may transition into the marketing phase of having the district communicate all of the necessary information it can, that is all of the facts related to a bond and a levy, while simultaneously working with the citizens committee to do the marketing side, the Vote Yes campaign that committee can do. The district can't do both of those, only the facts part. So that one, that second goal is going to look a little bit different, but I would imagine that may be actually the bold top of the list.
Yes, I think that
So much time and energy is going to be focused there at the beginning of the year. Your third goal is around belonging and equity work, ensuring that all the kids and families that we serve are heard, valued, respected. Some strategies there, so you'll have to decide if that continues on. And then finally, the legislative stuff in terms of both communication and advocacy. Obviously, you all attended the WASDA Day on the Hill this year. We spent some time there and did that work. And had some good, I think, in a general sense, some good success this year. So special education allocation was increased from 13.5 to 15, got a little bit of help on the multiplier. We were able to avoid a couple ugly bills. I talked about that in the meeting previously. So I think, to the extent that legislative advocacy and work continues to be a goal that you have, it may not necessarily be the thing that Alexa's going to have time in giving a bond and levy to dive into deeply in the coming year. So just FYI that those are some things that as you think about June and July and next year, some things that you're going to want to have your mind on as to what you want to focus on.
I think we should keep that legislative thing in there. It's a goal that we continue to do that. It might not be a primary goal, but we still need to be active as much as we can. It shouldn't be maybe her top priority, but it should be on our goals to continue advocacy.
So we had Shelley, we had invited Shelley and Jacqueline, and well, we invited Joel as well, but Joel doesn't respond often, ever. Camera's on, but anyway. But we did get Shelley and then Jacqueline to cancel via Zoom, kind of pandemic related. One of the things that we hear from them often is once the legislative session starts, it's really difficult for them to be here or to engage with us other than with like me on the phone or text or email. It might be wise, given Alexa's newness, for you to think about maybe at some point in September or October when they have time, when they're not tied to the legislative session, maybe to ask them to come and do a site visit.
Yes.
So it could be a good chance for Alexa to introduce herself, to get them on site, and just have them in the community. So that'd be something that we add to that list of invite them to be on campus and to be here with us.
Yeah, I think
Something to
that's
think
good.
about.
There you go, kid. One more thing.
Well, speaking of, do you have more? Okay, I was just gonna do a few updates. Working on board calendar for next year. We'll keep it consistent, second and fourth Monday. Second, we'll aim to do work sessions like this where we're having just dialogue, discussions, updates, board education, and then keep the fourth where we take action, make recommendations, those kinds of things. But the dates will by and large remain the same, so and oftentimes they're just off by one date. So if it's January 7th, we'll meet January 8th. So keeping it very consistent with this year, topics included. So it'll look very similar. Next, working on creating the advocacy committee for the bond and the levy. In the past, the board has been present. I think that we had 2 board members present, so wondering, and maybe you can think about who would like to be present and a part of that committee, or if you want to be a part of that committee. You don't all have to jump up and down at once. But working on, Joey Hodgson has volunteered to continue with the
Rebecca's
financial
really
aspect.
She's awesome.
So Jody will continue with the finances, and then I think we have one person that might be willing to co-chair, and so thinking about finding a partner in that for both of them, because it's the bond, and then we'll be working with Megan tomorrow to begin creating a stakeholder group and thinking about who needs to be represented as a part of that advocacy committee. And would love your ideas if you think of people that we should be inviting also to be a part of that committee.
How many people are even still around from the last one? Do we
Citizens
have a list
Committee?
of the last?
It was pre-pandemic. It's been a while. So
Oh yeah, it was like 10 years ago we did.
yeah. We've gone very. I think with good success, we went very information heavy. Avoided
Yes.
some of the kind of rah sign waving stuff, but given this political climate and given kind of just so yesterday was the latest special election. There were 2 double levy failures. Centralia experienced a double levy failure this year, so they'll be without levy funding, and I have to look at the list. Can't remember the other one. So 2 double levy failures. They ran in February, failed, ran again in April, last week, and failed. And then there were 4 more bond measures that failed in the special election. So difficult climate.
But we got this.
Yeah, that's right.
Yes.
So the whole point really
We're due
is,
for a win.
Yes.
I think that
It's our
this-
turn.
Yeah, this climate really is. I think we're going to need
Right?
is some citizen, some rallying
Purple.
of the troops, and a lot of support. It's not just. I don't think information's going to carry the day.
We will give it our best shot, starting community engagement. So starting to invite folks that I haven't had the opportunity to meet yet in the community.
And it doesn't mean that it has to be the same 2 board members all the time. We just need to make a really good
Schedule.
schedule to be there. Because we want to be part of it. We want to be proactive, but we don't want to. I mean, if somebody wants to do it, great. But it's also, you can't tell them what to do, and you're just there to be part of it and helpful.
So two points to make sure, just in terms of communication and information. Remember that it is a bond and a levy year. So, and we'll work with Megan to make that decision as to what extent you have a group of people that are really focused bond and a group of people that are really focused levy. It's similar work in terms of getting the word out and sharing information and why it would be good to support a bond, good to support a levy, but there, and I think there'll be some advantage in that when you have those, when you have both on the same ballot, it differentiates. This is an EPO levy. This is what you paid for. This is a renewal of that ongoing educational programs and operations levy that you've done for decades. And this bond is it's the one that, okay, you passed a bond in 2008. We built Deer Park High School. What a beautiful facility, Winterfest, educating kids, all of that stuff. And now as that debt expires, now we have the ability to do all of these projects. And so you'll be able to differentiate. And I think that's probably why when you put a bond and a EP&O levy on the same ballot, why they tend to be more successful, because people actually, it tells the story. So anyway, there's that. And then the second part of that, slipping my mind, I was going to say was related to bond and levy. It'll come back to me.
Someday.
On my way home, probably.
2 in the morning.
In the shower.
July 1st.
Yeah. Usually wake up from the dead sleep.
He still knows that.
He does.
Cool.
Yes, if any of our public who are interested in being a part of the advocacy committee too, let me know.
Like those who own a newspaper.
I don't do new
Okay.
taxes. I won't vote against you, but
It's
I
not new.
tax.
It's
I don't do
replacing,
taxes.
it's replacing what you're already using.
Your kid will benefit.
I can't. My kid will benefit regardless.
Not if our schools aren't able to
Yeah,
fund
we
anything.
don't, and we're out of space.
You should be for, not for new taxes, but for
I
people.
told you I won't go against you. I just can't sell ice to an Eskimo. I can't do it.
All right.
Anything
Would you
else?
flip the sign?
We'll
That's
still
it.
love you.
Stand on the corner, flip the sign?
I might put the sign.
Nothing else?
There's pizza involved.
That's it.
Sure.
Bargaining.
Deal.
So we are going to close the regular meeting at whatever time it is,
7:09.
7:09. Take everybody out, and we are going to have a bargaining meeting for half an hour.
Sounds good.
So thank you, ladies and gentlemen,
Yes.
and everybody in the public for playing with us.
Well, you're gonna be bargaining if you want.
Bye.